Welcome to the Heaven on Earth podcast, a world where you study the story you were born into and redesign it into the story you choose. A world where you can have heaven on earth right here, right now, no matter the past. For me, heaven on earth is a holistic experience, leading with the heart, engaging with mind, body, and spirit. It's mindful, fostering calm and secure attachments. As we rise into consciousness, it's an earthly journey where we sensually embrace dynamic living. Welcome to the Heaven on Earth podcast, and it's been a minute because I took the summer off and I traveled 6 weeks to Jakarta, Singapore, Bali, and Istanbul, and it was amazing. And if you want to see any documentation of that trip, my Heaven on Earth tour, because that's what I called it. I called it the Heaven on Earth tour. Go to my Instagram and you'll see a bunch of stuff that I've posted there because, my whole life existence is about talking about how do we bring heaven here, not after we've died, which is what we've been taught to believe, but here, right now. There is so much heaven to experience, to see, to believe in here on earth. And so I really just want to make sure that we know what this podcast is about. This podcast is about helping all of us know that there is beauty and love and abundance and prosperity that we can access today, no matter what our narrative, what our story, the story we were born into, no matter what happened to us. Most of you know that I'm a trauma survivor myself, complex trauma survivor. I work with people who have CPTSD. I work with people with general anxiety disorder. I work with people with major depressive disorder. And I am a true believer. This is my spiritual message. It's my emotional message. It's my professional message to the world that we can have heaven on earth, no matter what story we were born into. What this podcast is not, it is not a religious podcast, even though sometimes I do choose phrases, scriptures from many religious traditions, because I think it's based on the idea that as human beings, we are multi-layered. We are intellectual, we are emotional, we are physical, and we are spirit. And so it is not a religious podcast. This is not about religious dogma. But I do quote high masters who knew a lot about heaven on earth and brought the message to us. This is not about spiritually or emotionally bypassing our past. This podcast is not about pretending or avoiding or repressing or suppressing the painful, negative, wounded parts of ourselves. In fact, I'm a true believer that if we do not deal with those parts of ourselves, we cannot live a heaven on earth life, because we will constantly be ambushed by our wounds everywhere, all the time. And today's episode is going to be exactly about that. So first, let me introduce myself for those of you who don't know me and who are new to this podcast. And for those of you who do, I've missed you all summer, but I am back with a ton of passion and of cleanse. I did a beautiful cleanse over the summer. I'm Claudia Cauterucci. I am a Washington, D.C. based psychotherapist. I've been a psychotherapist for over 25 years now. I'm a spiritual seeker. I'm also the creator and architect of the Dynamic Re-Evolution curriculum. And that is a 4-part curriculum. The first part is the dynamic meditation method, where we do exactly what I just said, which is we go in, look at our wounds head on. We face the demon, as I say, and we clean up. We clean up our emotional past, our wounded. We clean up our distorted thinking that makes us believe that we are unworthy of prosperity, of love, of our divine nature.
So we do a lot of cleaning up in the dynamic meditation method, and we also learn how to be in the now moment. And in order to have a heaven on earth life, that's what we need to do. I also lead a group called Wealth from Within, Inner Journey, Outer Abundance, because I believe that we can't do this alone, and most of us have been doing this alone for quite a while. So this is a community that has done dynamic meditation. These are seekers, these are self-explorers, people who want to grow and evolve. And we track from many types of disciplines: scientific, psychological, evolutionarily, biological. We try and track prosperity and abundant living from multiple angles, like spokes on a wheel, but in the center, we've got abundance. And then I do a training called the Empath Leader, and that's a higher level training for empaths who've been doing the healing work for a long time now and are ready to be the sovereign of their own life, to pilot, to self-direct, to self-govern, to have self-mastery of their own life. I'm a true believer that where the planet is today, which is in a high evolutionary moment, that is unique. We are in a unique moment on planet Earth. And I believe that the type of leadership that we need is the type of leadership that holds the characteristics that empaths have. So that's why I call it the Empath Leader Training. And I just launched a book in March called that, The Empath Leader, where we're coming out with the second edition in January of 2025. And the last part of the Dynamic Re-Evolution curriculum. This podcast is all about connecting all the dots. And I use an approach I received as a message: the all is in the small, and the small is in the all. And what that means is that whatever one individual, whatever I experience inside myself, and the steps that I take to dissect, understand, self-reflect, and evolve from what's going on inside myself is also happening out in the collective, out in the population, out on the planet. So the best healing, and the tagline to the dynamic meditation method is heal yourself, heal the planet. Because the moment you start to do work on you, on me, the ripple effects begin to happen out on the planet. I'm a huge believer in that. So those are the 4 steps to dynamic re-evolution method. Okay, so let's jump right in. I do have notes. I always have notes. I always take notes. I love reading from my notes. So today's episode is called The Shadow. Some of you might have heard about doing shadow work and might have heard that this term originated from the psychoanalyst Carl Jung. Let's go over just a little bit about what he proposed, and then I'll go into how I see shadow work. Now, there's lots of amazing, brilliant teachers that are talking about working with the shadow and doing shadow work. But the way that I want to connect the dots here is how I've worked with it in my private practice and how that impacts what's happening out in the world, out in the collective. The shadow, what Jung meant by the shadow, are the repressed part of ourselves. The part of ourselves that we hide, and we push it into the deep unconscious. We just bury that shadow. And what we bury it from, what we separate our shadow from, is what Jung called the persona. Freud would have called it the ego self. In astrology, we call it our sun sign, how we present into the world. So how we present into the world is different from the shadow, because the shadow we hide away, we push down, we lock it somewhere with multiple locks, we stick it in the attic, we put it in the basement. The shadow is an amalgam or a compilation or the greatest hits of what you see, what I see as our weaknesses, our impulses, our desires, our instincts, what comes out of us raw. And Sometimes those are things, there are negative impulses, there's aggression and rage and sexual fantasy sometimes, and what people might find as perverse sexual fantasies. They're the part of us that we find negative. But included in the shadow are the parts of us that actually we find beautiful and creative, because impulses and instincts can be creative, can be vibrant, can be alive. Let's talk a little bit about how it forms. It forms because as they are coming out when we are children, they are not accepted. These are parts of ourselves that are not accepted, that are rejected, and where we begin to get the message that we should be afraid to reveal these parts of ourselves because they will be ridiculed, maybe even punished. We learn very quickly early on to lock these sides of ourselves away, the shadow sides. Another way that the shadow forms is that we look at our cultural norms, our societal norms, and we realize, wait a minute, what society, what my family culture, what my religious culture, what my ethnic culture expects from me, it doesn't jive. This does not match. I cannot be, or I cannot have these sides of myself. They will be rejected, abused, punished, and ridiculed. So I learned really quickly to put them aside, and so do you. And all of this, of course, is approval seeking, which is a basic human condition. In fact, the way that I teach it is seeking approval is a survival mechanism. And the way that most psychotherapists or healers or people who do any type of self-reflection, philosophers, is that the human is seeking approval, because without the approval of a group, of the village, of our society, we might be isolated to die, or we might be killed. This is why in our DNA, seeking approval is a survival mechanism. So you can imagine when our group, when our culture, when our family does not accept sides of ourselves, we put it into the shadow. How does the shadow appear to us? The shadow appears to us in dreams, if we do dream work. And if you know of the early psychoanalysts like Jung and Freud, they did a lot of dream work. I absolutely adore doing dream work because we get to have access to the unconscious without any edits. We get to know what our internal state of the union is, what's happening inside of us that we might not know consciously. And dreams will bring that out, and dreams will bring out the shadow. For example, in our dream, we might find ourselves sexually seducing someone that in our conscious life, we would not allow ourselves to think of. Or we might find ourselves having lots of rage in a dream. That certainly has happened to me, where I'm raging at someone in a dream that I might not allow myself to be angry at in my conscious life. The other way that shadow shows up is through triggers. And I have a lot of videos talking about thank you triggers. And I teach my folks who I work with to say thank you triggers, because I believe that they lead to a certain fault line. They lead to the wounds that we are not willing to look at. So when we have a trigger, when we get a stimulus from the outside world and we are triggered, it means that it hit a fault line, it hit a wound. And if you have someone to do the work with, or if you read about doing the work, or if you do the work yourself with a therapist, these are gold mines. This is where we can do actual healing. And the shadow always shows up in our triggers in some way. Psychedelic psychotherapy, now that there's this whole movement in terms of using psychedelics in safe settings with appropriate guides and people around you, the shadow will come up. The shadow will come up in dreams and in psychedelics in the form of an animal, a creature, a dragon, something that lets us know that these are parts of ourselves that are powerful, but that we don't allow them to show up in our 20s. The other way that I believe that shadows show up strongly is in relationships. Boy, you want something to pull out our shadow? Be in a relationship. That includes our children, our parents, our lovers, our best friends, our bosses. Relationships will pull out your shadow. Now, whether you work on them or not is separate, but they will pull out our shadow for sure. I want to say that addictions pull up our shadow, but actually, I happen to believe that addictions are the way that we avoid our shadow. And that could be, alcoholism, of course, and drug addiction, workaholism, for sure, overeating, undereating, porn. I believe that this is the defensive ways that we've used to avoid these shadows, because it is hard to keep that shadow down. It is painful because remember, our shadow isn't always negative. But if we're in a certain religion, if we're in a certain culture, parts of ourselves that we have to keep quiet. This is what's most painful about the whole thing, is that not only does the collective reject it, we reject it. And some of our shadows get so big that they become horrific. They really take forms that are incredibly destructive to the people around us and to ourselves. This is all the more reason to work on our shadows. Lastly, the ways that our shadows show up is in the body. And whether you believe in holistic healing or not, and I am a holistic healer, and what that means is that I believe that what we think and what we feel and how we connect to ourselves and to our surroundings spiritually has an impact on our body. If I'm always having negative self-talk and negative beliefs about myself, maybe because it was passed down, you better believe that this will lodge in my body in some way. Anger, resentment, sorrow, unprocessed grief, and the shadow will find a place to lodge in your body. All the more reason, again, to do the work, because it's not just doing the work through medication or through how we eat or when we exercise. It's how we clean up on our unconscious. And a big part of our unconscious is the shadow. So the big question is, how do we work on it? Integration. Integration is one of my favorite psychological words. It's been used a lot, and it's used because it is beautiful. It is what makes us whole. When we can integrate, when introverts can step away and integrate their experiences, when we're in the middle of a fight and we can both step away and integrate the data that's coming to us. Integration is this moment to step aside, take a sacred pause, and bring it in, bring all the information in for us to reflect, analyze, dissect, put pieces of the puzzle together. Integration is a beautiful whole word. When we integrate to a blended family, right? People from one family, people from another. When we integrate cultures, this is a coming together. Holistic healing is about integrating the mind, the body, the emotions, and the spirit. Integration is a coming together, and it makes us whole. This is how I like to work with the shadow, and I talk about the shadow. Listen, when we don't give the shadow attention, let's say we've repressed it for many years, locked it away deep into our unconscious. Trust and believe have no doubt. We have so much research, not in just psychology, but in the history of humanity, that the shadow will insist on showing up. The shadow, as I like to say, will lurk. The shadow is right around the corner, lurking. The shadow will ambush you. Out of the blue, something will come out of your mouth that you never expect, that goes straight into the fault line, that reveals a part of yourself. The shadow ambushes and attacks. And it attacks by being destructive to others and to yourself. This is where addictions come in, because addictions are a way of staying away from ourselves. Addictions are a form of self-hate that quiet that side of ourselves. So we have to have a lot of compassion, because addictions are a way to try and adapt to the wounds that we have or the self-hatred we have. And by the time we're a full-on alcoholic, it means that the shadow has chased us and chased us and chased us. And we have been running for the woods with our addictions, trying to get away from it. Okay. The shadow will destroy. Domestic abuse is all about the shadow. Childhood abuse, sexual abuse, pedophilia, sex trafficking, all about the unintegrated shadow, whether it be because of intense low self-esteem, whether it be because of hatred towards a parent, towards a culture, towards a sexuality. The shadow, if unattended and unintegrated, will destroy. Have no doubt about it. The shadow gets louder. I like to see the shadow as trying to get our attention. And it screams, and it's messy, and it's gooey, and it's icky. And sometimes, and this is important for the all is in the small and the small is in the all. This is really important for that. It's so gross sometimes that it disgusts us. It disgusts us about our own selves. We're disgusted. And although this sounds really dramatic, it's true. That's why we repress it so much. Because we got the message that this is disgusting, that this is unacceptable, that this is rejectable. And so we began to do it towards ourselves. That gets in. That gets in. And so we began to repress it in ourselves. But it gets louder. It demands, it insists by lurking, ambushing, attacking, destroying. It insists by unconscious spastic behavior, by splurting, by spewing. It insists on getting our attention. Super important to know. It's sneaky and it's shady when it's unintegrated. When we don't give it attention, right? What do kids do when they don't get attention? What do groups do when they don't get attention? Have you ever seen a dog that's left outside all the time? It will bark nonstop. Nonstop. It will try and get attention. And so will the shadow. So how do I talk about it? I talk about it first about integration, and then I talk about as the highest form of action with the shadow is befriending it. Now wait, let's not get ambitious yet. We can do shadow work alone, but I don't suggest it. Do it with someone. And nowadays, I love YouTube University, as I call it, because you can find all sorts of videos and guides and wise teachers who actually teach step by step about how to do shadow work. Now there's workshops. I started dynamic meditation in 2010. Dynamic meditation is all about befriending the shadow, the ickiest parts of ourselves. And we do some really, really, really intense shadow work. We do intense and shadow work about the places that we're most horrified, wounded, disgusted, ashamed. Sometimes ashamed. We do a lot of work with wanting to harm someone who has harmed us. Listen, if we don't admit to ourselves that we want to harm someone because we have felt wounded by them or rejected by them, it will come out in a spastic, unconscious way. If we don't accept the parts of ourselves that are competitive or that want to feel superior to others, or that wants revenge because we were sexually abused or because we were demeaned or humiliated at school, if we don't look at those sides of ourselves, at those cravings and work through them, we will act them out. And I think there's a myth, there's a distorted belief that if we allow these feelings to come up, they will be enacted. And that's not entirely true. In fact, it's the process with a guide, with a therapist, in a therapy group, at a workshop, through breath work, again, surrounded by wise, caring people who might have more knowledge than you in the process of shadow work, of wound work. If we allow these experiences, these wounds, these cravings, these desires, these instincts to come out, actually pull them out of our unconscious, out of our psyche, out of our bodies, right? Because they lodge there. Then we won't need to act. By the way, it doesn't mean we don't make decisions. We don't decide to go confront someone, or we don't decide to write them a letter, or we don't decide to go ahead and divorce the person that we've been fantasizing about divorcing. All of that doesn't mean that we don't move into action. What we don't do is move into spastic, unconscious action, destructive action. We move into action that has the triple D's, right? We discover it, we discern, and then we decide with intense inner deep work. The other reason why we don't do it alone, because it's hard, it's painful, it's gooey. We don't want to face parts of our past. Sometimes we just hate the parts of ourselves where the shadow lives. So when we can find a caring, non-judgmental environment in the presence of someone, we can slowly at least look at it, because that's the process. The process is actually logical. We look at it, we cringe, we cry, we need a hug, we discuss it. When I'm doing some of this work, I say, all right, let's say it's an instinct. I like to give them characters. This scary girl, let's put her over there. Let's just talk about her. Let's understand her. How did she develop? These are some good questions. Where did she come from? Where did he come from? Why does he have these impulses? Why does he have these beliefs that make him or her or them so unacceptable? Why were they rejected? When we look at some photo albums, metaphorically, what happened when you brought that side of yourself out? What happened? Where did you get wounded? Where did you decide as a child, consciously or unconsciously, to completely bury this part of yourself? And then as we get to know them, as we get to see them, as we allow them into the room, and this is all a metaphor, but it works beautifully, then we can start to talk about ways that this was adaptive, that this was a way to handle this in an adaptive manner. Even closeting it, burying it, repressing it, suppressing it was a way to manage how hard it was to have this shadow, this impulse, this instinct, this desire. And little by little, can you see how then we can bring the shadow and have it sit next to us? Because we realize, oh, you were protecting me. And then we can actually ask, what is the message here? Personally, I think most everything that's labeled a disorder was adaptive at some point. And whether it's depression or anxiety the way that I tend to work with it is to hear the message in it. What is in here? And that's hard work, by the way. Oof, I've done it myself, and it is hard. It is hard to go into it instead of going out. It's going out of the addiction or avoiding it or running, to go in. And everyone who knows me knows my emphasis on the inner work. Hard. I don't blame people who really want to stay away from it because we're afraid of the shadow. But when we do it, we can slowly start realizing, oh, this was a way of protecting myself, of adapting to an environment, of fitting in, of belonging. And we all really need to belong. It's a survival mechanism. But once we understand it, then we can move into finding ways that we prefer to belong. Then we can actually really start getting creative. But none of that can be done unless we bring in the shadow. And remember, listen, the good news is that we can work with the shadow. The bad news is, and this is for everyone who's listening and watching this, the shadow is going to show up no matter what. And it's going to get louder. It will try and get your attention. Louder and louder and louder. And some people live their whole lives with louder and louder experiences of the shadow. They never sit down to look at it. They project it, they blame, they shame. They say that's not me their whole lives. So knowing that the shadow is there does not mean that we do the work. So the good news is we can do the work on it. And the bad news is whether we do the work or not, it's there and it gets bigger. What is the message? What is the message? Is a message. This is who I am. This is my sexuality. This is what I desire. This is my instinct. I am angry at my mother or my father. There's so many messages. I can just give you a million examples of what the beautiful messages are in the shadow work. Why have I lived like this all my life and not been more authentic? Yeah, I do want the divorce. How about this one? It wasn't my fault. It's a big one. Guaranteed, underneath all the layers, and for some of us, there's more layers of the shadow than for others, because some of us have had experiences of more abuse, of more rejection, of more abandonment than others. All of that is part of the human condition for everyone. But once we get through all of those layers, what's at the very bottom, my dear ones, my loves, my fellow humans, is a message of, and I will love myself no matter what. That's at the core of heaven on earth, is that it's part of the human condition. It's part of humanity that we learn and have to untie all the ways that we have been wounded, and that our shadow is everywhere as we do this cleanup work, as we do it. And listen, what I say to everyone is, you know how in 12 steps they say it works if you work it? And I love that phrase. It works if you work it. When you do the inner work, when you do the inner journey, when you have the courage, because it takes unbelievable courage to go inside, to do a detox on our wounds. Once we get through those layers, the bottom, the most a priori, everyone knows that I use those words, a priori, our root chakra, when it's unfurled, you know what it says? It says, I am loved. I am lovable. I am safe. Including whether my group, my culture, my ethnicity think that they should approve of me or not, whether they judge me or not. I'm deciding to love myself. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. So let's connect the dots. Let's connect to the all is in the small and the small is in the all. Because the Heaven on Earth podcast, and part of how I see who I am in the world, is that I connect the individual to the collective. And I believe that the psycho-spiritual process and the holistic healing that we do as individuals is what's happening out there in the world. Just as we have cells in our body and those cells create one individual, one person. Those cells are what humans are. You know, human beings are all just a bunch of cells that create the body of our country, and that creates the bodies of the countries that populate the planet. And that's how it is. So the all is in the small, us, and the small is in the all. So let's connect it. Listen. As hard as it is, as scary, as horrific as it is to see some of the shadows of our country, of our countries, of our humanity, as hard as it is to see racism and child trafficking and the abuse to women and children and to animals, and to see levels of deceit, webs of deceit, to see people's desire to destroy. As hard as it is, we say thank you, triggers. Because it pulls up the gunk. It pulls up the humanity's shadow. I need you to hear me and how important it is for this moment in time. So sometimes it takes one person. Netflix documentaries are full of narcissistic individuals who led cults, who are leading our political systems. Certainly in religious organizations, we're seeing it. Those are the triggers. Those were the messengers who pulled up with them the shadow that was in these institutions, that are in our government, that are in our nation, and that are a part of humanity, that are part of our history as humans. We need to see it. We need to do the work. Everything that I have explained here is what has to happen in the all. In order for us to befriend ourselves as a culture, as a humanity, as governments, we must know what's lurking, what's ready to ambush, what's ready to attack. A lot of us knows that if it's quiet, locked away, hidden, it's dangerous. There's all sorts of figures that did all the stuff behind the scenes, and they still do all over. So we need to have the triggers. We need to have these people become public, not to repress it again, but to actually pull out the whole web of shadow, the whole history of these shadows. Now, the same trajectory applies. If these are not integrated and worked with and healed and repaired, if there are not genuine apologies, we can't do the work. It will get louder. It will get more destructive. And I can give examples of what's going on in the planet right now. I don't need to. All of you know, in our country. But this isn't new. What is new in this moment, in evolutionary history, is our access to information. It's exponential. What is new is our access to healing for free. What is new is that there are groups all over the globe that are doing their cleanup work. What is new is that we are talking about the narcissist, even for you guys who are just annoyed at hearing that. But we needed to say the word narcissist. Why? Because all of a sudden, the moment we named it, the moment we claimed that word, all of it started to come out. All of it. In our government, in cults, in religious organizations, sex trafficking, I mean, everywhere. In families, in schools, we saw the destruction. Okay. So what is new isn't the fact that the shadow, the deep, dark, repressed, hidden shadow exists, the shady, the sneaky, the disgusting, the scary. It's not that that exists. No, 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 no. We've had slavery. We had the Inquisition. I mean, we've had historically a ton of this happening. Burning women at the stake. What's new is that we have access to not only the information, to seeing it, to it being called out, but that we have access to healing our food chains, to healing our water, to healing our land, to being able to make repair to whole groups of people that we've injured in the past. Our access to repair, to well-being, to holistic, to the ability of integration and befriending and coming together is more available than ever on planet Earth and in the history of humanity. So it's all the same. It's all the same. And as hard as it is to look at, let's look at it. Let's bring it into the room. Let's understand it. Let's see where it came from. And little by little, we integrate it. And of course, once it's integrated, without bypassing the icky and the gooey, what I call the bridge and tunnel work, right? The bridge and tunnel work where we crawl our way through some stuff, we become more whole. All of us have wounds. All of us. All of our stories have wounds. And then once we integrate, befriend our shadow, then we can start noticing the heaven on earth life. Why? Because we're less hypervigilant. What are the signs of trauma, right? Hypervigilance, flashbacks, startle responses, constantly feeling like we are in danger, constantly. Addictions. Once we can clean up on all that, once we can calm the central nervous system, once we can find secure attachments to other human beings, right, which is my definition of heaven on earth, then we have the wherewithal, we have the holistic mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual wherewithal to notice how much heaven we have here on earth. So, yay! Welcome back. Welcome back to Heaven on Earth and the Heaven on Earth podcast. And we're just going to be doing some juicy stuff and talking about things like this. And again, just remember that the all is in the small and the small is in the all. And that if you heal yourself, you're healing the planet. And that anytime we do the inner journey, we can see and we will have outer abundance. So listen, if you like my content, please subscribe, like. I'm on a mission to spread heaven on earth, to spread easy, practical ways of healing. And just know I have a new series on my YouTube channel called Cloudisms. And that term came from people I work with. They're like, this is a cloudism, or they'll quote me on things that I didn't even know I was saying. And some of them have asked me, please do your cloudisms. And what they are words and phrases, memorable words and phrases that help us with emotional regulation or mentally reframing or spiritually connecting. Those aren't as long as my podcast, but they're really, really helpful, and you'll remember them. There you go. Please like, share, comment. Let's spread the word. Let's do it together. You would be so helpful if you did that. Thank you so much. See you again.